My name is Scarlett Hayes. I'm 32 years old, and for the last 10 years, I've been an inconvenient ghost haunting the periphery of the Thorne family empire. The first palpable hint of the night's impending corporate and emotional disaster wasn't the biting cold of the Green Acres, New York air, nor the sight of the towering, perfectly lit fir tree dominating the lawn of our Georgian-style estate. It was the frantic, barely contained, conspiratorial energy vibrating just beneath the surface of the sprawling property. Arriving at the mansion on the afternoon of New Year's Eve, a holiday my father, Randall Thorne, always insisted on hosting as his final, triumphant spectacle, I immediately noticed the tension. Randall, the self-proclaimed titan behind Thorne Digital Legacy, TDL, kept nervously tapping his gold Patek Philippe watch, a relentless gesture that always signaled he was counting down to either immense profit or absolute panic. He wasn't just checking the time. He was waiting for the perfect moment to detonate a truth bomb. I pulled my discreet black Audi sedan up the winding drive, taking meticulous care not to track slush onto the pristine cobblestone pavers. I could have arrived in my company's custom-outfitted armored vehicle, flown straight from my San Francisco headquarters on the Gulf Stream. But tonight was about the performance, and the first act required me to maintain the facade of the moderately successful, slightly eccentric middle daughter who had run off to Silicon Valley to figure things out. The lingering shadow of the girl who left a decade ago was still visible, but the woman who returned was forged in the cold, ruthless fire of self-made success. The estate itself was formidable, a monument built on the foundation of my grandfather's quiet genius and my father's subsequent, aggressive expansion. 6 bedrooms, 7 fireplaces, a state-of-the-art security system, and history of dismissive condescension that ran deeper than the house's bedrock. This house was never a home. It was a carefully curated museum dedicated to Randall's professional identity, and a gilded cage for the rest of us. We were all merely supporting characters in his singular, self-written narrative. The legacy began with my grandfather, who started TDL in a small, dusty office back in the 70s with a revolutionary idea for localized inventory management software. Randall took over in 1995, and under his leadership, the business exploded from a respectable $10 million regional operation into a bloated, $50 million corporate enterprise. Every family gathering, every social event, inevitably morphed into a tedious celebration of Randall's business acumen. The Thorne name became synonymous with untouchable wealth in New York business circles, and Randall never allowed anyone to forget it, especially his children. There are 3 of us, the Thorne heirs, each assigned a suffocating, predetermined role in his corporate play. First, there's Garrett. At 38, he's the eldest, and in Randall's myopic eyes, the anointed successor. Garrett majored in liberal arts, a degree he primarily used to fund parties. But the moment he graduated, Randall handed him a senior VP title and an office overlooking Manhattan. Garrett's corporate contribution was negligible, often confined to signing off on hefty expense reports for client cultivation that reeked of expensive bourbon and an entitled disregard for the balance sheet. He spent more time on his new customized sports cruiser, the Legacy, than he did actually leading TDL. Yet, Randall was perpetually convinced Garrett was the natural heir, the one who possessed the elusive gravitas necessary to command a boardroom. Then there is me, Scarlett. I am the anomaly, perpetually stuck and overlooked in the middle at 32. I was the one who actually inherited my grandfather's technical passion and coding brilliance. I taught myself advanced programming at 12 and built my first functional business application at 15. I tore through Stanford, double majoring in computer science and finance, graduating summa cum laude. I came home armed not just with ideas, but with detailed, actionable blueprints to modernize the company years before our competitors even conceived of the idea. But to Randall, my legitimate achievements were always categorized as cute, academic, or, worst of all, impractical. He looked right through me in business discussions, treating my technical input like a naive suggestion appended to a serious corporate strategy. I was the invisible daughter, perpetually sidelined by my gender and my position in the birth order. And finally, Willow, 29, the youngest. She leveraged the Thorn name into pure social currency. She is a prominent luxury lifestyle blogger with hundreds of thousands of followers who obsess over her perfectly filtered glimpses into old money living. She had zero interest in enterprise software, but she never missed an opportunity to tag TDL in her posts, referring to herself as the digital heiress, without ever contributing a single hour of actual work. Our mother, Vivian Thorne, came from inherited wealth, the kind of family that valued discretion and appearances above all else. Vivian was the family's emotional lubricant, always ready to pour another glass of imported wine and smooth over the generational cracks. But her constant peacemaking was, in reality, a profound form of enablement. "Randall," she would occasionally venture, "perhaps Scarlett has a point with the digital pivot." But the instant Randall shot her the look, that familiar blend of annoyance and patriarchal dominance, she would immediately retreat, smoothing her designer dress and moving the conversation back to her latest charity gala. "Vivian, please," Randall would always scoff, his voice dismissive. "This is actual business we're discussing. Leave the market analysis to the men who understand real-world scalability." It was this relentless exclusion, this toxic cycle of dismissal, that served as the brutal crucible of my character. Every holiday gathering was a grueling exercise in self-control. Randall and Garrett would dominate conversations with industry jargon and insider gossip. I sat there silently, listening, internalizing, understanding the technology and the market dynamics better than both of them combined. If I ever dared to interrupt the look, the tight smile, the head tilt would paralyze me. "That's sweet, Scarlett," he'd patronize, but leave the business discussions to the people who understand the mechanics of enterprise scale. I realized then that my worth would never be measured by my intellect, but by his permission. Tonight, that permission was no longer needed. I was here to purchase the lock and key to the entire operation. I walked up the stone steps, my composure absolute. Vivian answered the door, her eyes widening as she took in my appearance. The performance had begun, and I was about to walk straight into the eye of the storm. The raw, burning memory of the TDL boardroom humiliation was the fire that had sustained me through 10 years of personal sacrifice. It wasn't just a simple technical failure. It was the definitive breaking point, the moment I transitioned from a hopeful daughter to a cold, utterly relentless competitor. I had just turned 22, fresh out of Stanford with dual honors, genuinely convinced that my academic credentials and proven technological aptitude would finally force my father, Randall, to take me seriously. I had spent months meticulously preparing the business plan. It wasn't just an app. It was a cloud-based integration solution, a middleware platform that could have revolutionized TDL's outdated product line years before any of our rivals even conceived of the idea. I had codenamed the platform the Pinnacle Engine. It was a clear, prophetic vision of the future of enterprise software, a blueprint that would have shifted the company from a sputtering regional player to a national technology leader. I remember walking into that boardroom, a heavy, intimidating space of dark mahogany, thick leather chairs, and the stifling scent of old ambition. My heart was pounding with a mixture of desperate hope and nervous energy. The board members, a collection of Randall's old-school friends and corporate allies, watched me with polite but distinctly distant expressions as I connected my laptop to the projector. They saw a nervous young woman. They didn't see the engineer and future CEO standing before them. I started my pitch, speaking with the clear, rapid precision that only comes from total mastery of your subject matter. I detailed the market analysis, the technical specifications of the Pinnacle engine, and the projected revenue streams. I spoke about the urgent need for modernization, security, and the inevitable obsolescence of their current system. But 10 minutes in, Randall shattered the illusion, not with anger, but with profound contempt. I was mid-sentence, discussing the security protocols of cloud migration, when he checked his Patek Philippe, sighed loudly enough for everyone to hear, and raised his hand, a preemptive, dismissive signal that stopped me mid-flow. "I think we've seen enough, Scarlett," he said, his tight smile of pity not reaching his eyes. "Honey, this is all very creative, very academic, but it is completely impractical for a serious enterprise like ours. Our clients want stability, not experimental, untested technologies." He then turned to the board members, offering an apologetic shrug, as if excusing a child's amateur mistake. "Gentlemen, my daughter recently graduated college. She's full of these fanciful notions of how the world should work. Now, shall we move on to actual business matters, the Q4 projections?" The handful of polite, practiced chuckles from the board members sounded like a physical slap across my face. The humiliation was total and searing. I packed up my laptop and presentation materials with hands that were shaking, trying desperately to maintain my composure. They moved on instantly, discussing golf course deals and investment banking gossip, acting as if I had never been there, as if my 10 minutes were merely a brief, embarrassing intermission. I had been utterly and completely erased. That night, the mahogany shame was all I could feel. It wasn't the technical rejection that mattered. It was the personal one. Randall hadn't just rejected my product. He had rejected my entire identity. He had confirmed that no matter how hard I worked, I would never be enough for his approval because I didn't fit his narrative of the successful heir. The Thorn name was a chain binding me to his narrow, patriarchal worldview. I made a vow, a cold, absolute promise. I would leave New York, leave the family business, and leave the Thorn name behind. I would build something of my own, something so successful, so undeniably valuable that even Randall Thorn, the great arbiter of actual business, would be forced to acknowledge its power. I would use the very blueprint he had mocked. I knew that to succeed, I had to become invisible. I had to shed the identity of Scarlett Thorn, the girl who craved his validation, and become Apex Hayes, the professional force who commanded the entire industry's respect. My $5,000 in savings wasn't capital. It was liberation money. I was cutting the cord and embracing the terrifying, exhilarating freedom of starting from zero. The failure of my father to see me was the catalyst for my destiny. I was leaving the gilded cage of Green Acres for the brutal, competitive wilds of San Francisco, armed with nothing but the rejected blueprint and a decade's worth of burning, controlled resentment. I was about to walk into the fire, ready to forge a new identity. I arrived in San Francisco like a financial fugitive, the Greenwich Stone mansion instantly replaced by a tiny, airless studio apartment in the Mission District. The rent alone was devastating, consuming nearly my entire monthly budget. The walls were paper thin. The noise from the street was constant, and the persistent scent was a potent mix of stale coffee, desperation, and cheap ambition. But standing there, amidst the chaos of my new reality, I felt a dangerous, fierce euphoria. This struggle was earned. This territory was mine. My parents, naturally, assumed it was a phase, a dramatic, short-lived tantrum. I remember overhearing Randall telling Vivian on a rare, tense phone call, "She'll be back by summer. She has no idea what real struggle is. She'll be begging for the money by June." That patronizing amusement, that utter conviction in my inevitable failure, was the best possible fuel. Every ounce of their doubt was converted into pure, relentless energy and focus. Those first 3 years were brutal. My dual honors from Stanford were useless currency. I was seen as an overeducated idealist with no real-world grit. The irony was a constant, bitter joke. I, who had been analyzing TDL's complex corporate financials since I was a teenager, couldn't secure a job that paid enough to afford anything but instant noodles. I started at the absolute bottom, taking graveyard coding shifts at a data entry firm just to cover the bills. My diet was exclusively cheap coffee, instant ramen, and the sheer unadulterated resolve driving me forward. Every dollar I earned, every spare moment I found, was funneled into building the company I had promised myself I would create. I had to prove that success wasn't a handout. It was coded, strategized, and fiercely defended. The pseudonym, Apex Hayes, quickly became paramount. I couldn't risk Randall's influence or the Thorn name's associated privilege tarnishing my effort. I needed my success or failure to be entirely decoupled from my past. Apex, symbolizing the highest point, the ultimate goal. Hayes, my grandmother's maiden name, a tribute to a line of strong women. Apex Hayes was born in that cramped apartment, a cold, clinical persona designed for one purpose: corporate dominance. My focus wasn't on the flashy consumer apps that dominated the valley. It was on the unsexy, entrenched pain points of legacy enterprise systems. This was where my academic idea, the Pinnacle engine, found its footing. I realized that thousands of mid-sized companies were still running on proprietary, archaic mainframes, crippled by their inability to communicate securely with modern cloud services and mobile platforms. The big tech players were too busy chasing consumer trends. They ignored the expensive, messy problem of integrating the old with the new. I spent nearly 18 months perfecting the code, living on 4 hours of sleep a night. My first major client was a regional distribution company whose ancient inventory system was costing them millions in lost efficiency. I took a massive risk, offering them a fixed-price contract, working for free until the integration was live and fully operational. When the Pinnacle engine went online, their efficiency skyrocketed. Their CTO, a genuine, ethical engineer, gave me a glowing testimonial and introduced me to 3 other struggling firms. The success of the Pinnacle engine proved 2 things. My technical genius was valid, and Randall Thorn had been spectacularly wrong about the market. My entire business model was built on his arrogance and his complacency. By year 3, I had enough seed money, all self-funded, fiercely protected from the hungry hands of venture capital, to rent a real office in Soma and hire my first 10 employees. We were a lean, efficient, highly intelligent team of technical misfits, people who had also been overlooked or dismissed by the traditional corporate world. We operated in stealth, avoiding the splashy press releases. The legend of Apex Hayes, the brilliant, reclusive founder, began to grow precisely because I was never seen. I perfected the art of the double life. Scarlett, the vague, slightly struggling daughter, would fly coach back east occasionally for a brief, tense visit describing her work vaguely as still grinding. Randall never pressed for details, having already written off my career as inconsequential. This suited me perfectly. Every casual dismissal was another layer of armor, another confirmation that they would never see the tsunami coming. I was building Apex Pinnacle Group, APG, brick by cold, calculated brick, fueled by the vow of exile I had made in the shadow of their contempt. Now, the technical groundwork was complete, and it was time to transition from building to conquering the man who had cast me out. The middle years in San Francisco, years 4 through 7, were characterized by a transition from survival to strategic dominance. The scent of stale ramen was long gone, replaced by the clean, dry air of my corner office overlooking the bay. Apex Pinnacle Group, APG, was a financial force, but I maintained the anonymity of Apex Hayes. This was the period where the $200 million valuation was built, brick by cold, hard metric. The biggest challenge wasn't scaling the technology, it was managing the relentless tide of venture capital interest. They saw the traction, the incredible profit margins, and the low overhead. They wanted a piece of Apex Hayes, but their terms always included relinquishing majority ownership and installing an experienced, patriarchal traditional CEO. I refused. Every single time. I remember one pitch meeting with a giant VC firm where the managing partner, a man who epitomized the arrogance of East Coast finance, told me, "Apex, you're brilliant, but you're too close to the product. We need a mature voice at the helm, someone with gravitas to handle the big corporate mergers." He used Randall's favorite, condescending word. "Sir," I replied, my voice dangerously calm, "I appreciate the advice, but my gravitas is defined by my balance sheet, and my balance sheet shows I have full control, which means I don't need your terms. I maintain majority ownership, determined that no one would ever dictate my company's strategic direction again. My freedom was worth more than any capital injection." This period solidified the reputation of Apex Hayes, a reclusive, brilliant operator, utterly focused on execution and allergic to media hype. I used my unique position, the rejected daughter turned silent mogul, to analyze the fatal flaws in TDL's armor. Randall's complacency was my greatest asset. He continued to rely on aging, expensive hardware and proprietary solutions, charging premium prices for services that were rapidly becoming obsolete. He dismissed the cloud as trendy noise. My focus shifted from internal coding to external leverage. I studied Randall's playbook, noting his aggressive M&A strategy and, more importantly, his dangerous reliance on a consolidated network of suppliers and clients. Randall, convinced the Thorn name was enough, had become too comfortable. I began the strategic phase of the takeover 2 years before New Year's Eve. I targeted TDL's ecosystem with ruthless efficiency. Using APG's substantial capital, I launched quiet, aggressive acquisition bids for Nexus Data Solutions, TechCore Industries, and Hudson Logistics. These were not just random vendors. They were the exclusive providers of the proprietary hardware and consulting services TDL relied upon for over 70% of its operations. By purchasing them, I created a deep, irreversible chokehold on Randall's supply chain. The moment the final ownership documents were signed, confirming that Apex Hayes now controlled Randall Thorn's critical suppliers, a cold, clinical satisfaction washed over me. It wasn't just revenge. It was the ultimate, irrefutable proof of professional superiority. I had beaten him at his own game, using his own flaws as the blueprint for his demise. All the while, the phone calls with Vivian continued, painting the picture of a vague, modestly successful girl still grinding it out. The greater my success, the more irrelevant I appeared to them. This invisibility was my most powerful tool, allowing me to orchestrate a multi-million-dollar acquisition from halfway across the continent without a single whisper of suspicion. The ghost was ready to materialize and the stage was set. I was returning home, not for a holiday, but for the final seismic reckoning. By the time Apex Pinnacle Group, APG, crossed the staggering $200 million valuation mark, my life was a meticulously managed, high-stakes game. Scarlett Hayes, the girl who had been dismissed, was now responsible for 4 times the market value of Thorn Digital Legacy, TDL. This $200 million game was built not just on achieving wealth, but on achieving scale and leverage that rendered Randall's old source of power completely obsolete. I had transitioned entirely from engineer to corporate general. I viewed the entire enterprise landscape, including my father's stumbling company, as a purely rational chessboard, and I wielded APG's capital with clinical detachment. My strategic playbook against TDL was built on 3 core, non-negotiable pillars. Pillar 1, controlling the ecosystem. This was the most crucial move against TDL. After securing his 3 core suppliers in the previous phase, I moved on to his lifeblood, his clients. Mackenzie Manufacturing and Westfield Distribution represented nearly 40% of TDL's annual recurring revenue, ARR. I didn't aggressively poach them, which would have been messy. I played a deeper, more sophisticated game. I approached their CTOs as Apex Hayes, offering them a trial integration of the Pinnacle engine, a solution so superior and cost-effective that it immediately exposed the antiquated system they were paying TDL millions to manage. But here was the twist. I then recommended they retain TDL for their immediate legacy management needs, citing Randall's stability and long-standing reputation. I set the trap, ensuring the clients knew I had the key to their future, but were still legally tethered to Randall's failing operation. I made TDL look like a temporary babysitter before the inevitable adoption by APG. Pillar 2, the calculated refusal of hype. APG was a financial giant that moved in total stealth. I refused the ubiquitous Silicon Valley fanfare. Apex Hayes gave interviews only when absolutely necessary, focusing entirely on technical innovation and quarterly results. This detachment and secrecy amplified the legend, making APG seem larger, more stable, and utterly professional, the exact opposite of the entitled, hype-driven culture Randall despised. The industry saw a ghost that moved markets. They had no idea she was the daughter he thought was still figuring things out. Pillar 3, the financial chokehold. My analysts constantly monitored TDL's debt covenants, cash flow, and client churn. They were in a slow, agonizing spiral due to high maintenance costs and non-existent R&D. When I had my CFO submit the initial anonymous acquisition offer, the one Randall rejected, I knew the $50 million was a generous, even inflated, life raft for a ship that was already sinking. Randall's pride, however, made him push the raft away. Mr. Thorne's rejection was accompanied by a statement about market valuation disrespect. Ms. Hayes, my COO, Commander Miller, reported dryly. "He wants respect," I replied, watching the rainy San Francisco skyline. "He'll get control instead." The failure of the Phoenix Gambit, the attempt at peaceful partnership, gave me the final, necessary ethical justification. I had offered reconciliation and a way to save his family name. He chose arrogance and dismissal. Now, I was buying him out completely. I orchestrated the final legal steps with military precision. The wire transfer of the $50 million was scheduled for 9 a.m. Eastern Time on New Year's Day, a symbolic transfer of power at the exact moment the calendar flipped. I needed to be on the East Coast, physically present in the house that had birthed and rejected me when the news hit the wire. It was the only way to deliver the maximum psychological and emotional shock. All the while, I maintained the facade of Scarlet Hayes. His blindness was my ultimate shield, allowing me to proceed with the final, absolute move of the $200 million game. I was walking into the Thorne estate not as Scarlet, the supplicant, but as the executioner holding the signed deeds. The week leading up to New Year's Eve was a hyper-focused sprint. From my San Francisco tower, I commanded the final, crucial maneuvers of Operation Apex, the acquisition of TDL. Every detail was planned, every contingency anticipated, but I never forgot the moment, 6 months prior, when the Phoenix Gambit failed. The Gambit was my genuine, though cold, attempt at professional compromise. I knew that Randall's refusal to sell would stem not from financial logic, but from patriarchal pride. If I attacked TDL head-on, he would fight me in court for years, sacrificing the company just to maintain control. My goal was control of the technology and the client list, not a lengthy, messy legal battle. So, I had my CFO working through an anonymous holding company submit a comprehensive partnership proposal. It was a lifeline designed for Randall's ego. Titled The Phoenix Project, the terms were extraordinarily favorable. Apex Pinnacle Group would inject 80% of the necessary capital for a full technological overhaul, assume all outstanding corporate debt, integrate the Pinnacle engine without revealing its origin, and take a controlling 49% stake. Critically, Randall Thorne would retain the title of CEO, and the Thorne name would remain prominently displayed. It was a golden parachute wrapped in a silver bullet. His company would be saved, his name would be preserved, but my technology would be in control. Randall's response was relayed back to me by Commander Miller with characteristic brevity and a touch of professional disdain. Ms. Hayes, Mr. Thorne declined the offer. His exact quote, which he relayed through his personal assistant, was, "I don't take charity from fly-by-night venture funds, especially when they think they can dictate terms to the Thorne name." He hadn't even read the technical specifications. He saw the word partnership and assumed weakness. "Good," I had stated, folding the printout of the rejected proposal. "The partnership path is closed. Initiate the full acquisition. He leaves us no choice but to buy him out completely." That refusal, the Phoenix Gambit's failure, was the final moral justification I needed. I had offered peace, he chose war. Now, the war would be quick, cold, and devastating. The private jet, a potent symbol of the wealth I had built outside his influence, was scheduled for the day before the holiday. I spent hours planning my wardrobe for maximum psychological impact. This wasn't about fashion, it was about authority. I chose the sharpest midnight blue Armani power suit, the simplest diamond studs, and the Patek Philippe watch, all subtle, unmistakable signifiers of a power that whispered. My longtime friend Isabel, the only person privy to the full scope of my deception, called me that evening. "Are you truly going through with this charade?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "New Year's Eve? After everything, Scarlet? You're setting yourself up for an emotional demolition site." "I have to be there, Izzy," I admitted, looking at the city lights. "I have to witness the moment his narrative collapses. He needs to know that the girl he dismissed is the only reason his legacy will survive the decade. It's the final payment on a 10-year debt. The flight across the country was spent in silent review of the contracts and internal memos regarding Garrett's embezzlement, the ugly truth I would use only as a tactical measure against my brother. I landed at the regional airport, the cold New York air a shocking contrast to the soft climate of the Bay Area. The black sedan waiting on the tarmac was the final, deliberate piece of the performance. As we drove through the familiar, exclusive streets of Green Acres toward the Stone Estate, I felt a deep sense of determination. The house, pristine and imposing, looked exactly the same. The holiday decorations were perfect. It was a flawless portrait of a success that was, beneath the surface, rotting from within. I instructed the driver to wait. I took a deep, steadying breath, adjusting the cuffs of my suit. The Scarlet Hayes who walked up those steps was now Apex Hayes. I was ready to walk into the final act of the longest, most personal strategic maneuver of my life. I was about to purchase my freedom, and with it, the family legacy Randall could no longer manage. The entrance into the Thorne estate was the calculated start of the final performance. I walked through the heavy mahogany door, bypassing the household staff who reached out to take my coat, and immediately sensed the atmosphere of strained anticipation. Vivian Thorne met me in the foyer, her eyes instantly widening as she took in the sleek, professional polish of my appearance. She was expecting the daughter who flew commercial. She was met by the CEO who owned the jet. "Scarlett, darling," she murmured, her voice tight with nervous energy. "You look so sharp. That suit, and is that a new watch? So subtle." "Just professional, Mom," I replied, allowing only a minimal, confident smile. "Business is doing well." She ushered me inside, her gaze lingering on the minimalist clutch I carried. "Your father is utterly consumed. A massive deal to finalize. Says it's a game changer for the Thorne name. He's been in his study all afternoon." Her voice betrayed the familiar sting of exclusion. "I'll say hello quickly," I said, placing my clutch, containing my private phone set to receive the 9 a.m. wire transfer confirmation, gently on a marble pedestal. The study, the sanctum of Randall's power, felt just as intimidating as it had a decade ago. I knocked once, a formality, and entered, immediately bypassing the customary visitor's chair. Randall looked up, his brow furrowed, his recognition delayed by my sheer professional polish. "Scarlett, didn't expect you this early," he mumbled, standing for a brief, distant handshake. I maintained my position, leaning casually against the edge of his massive desk, a subtle, nonverbal challenge to his authority. The flight was smooth. I took the private route. Saves time. He frowned, dismissing the cost, but the word private clearly registered. Before he could challenge me, his executive phone chirped. He snatched it up, his face hardening instantly. "Excuse me, Scarlett. This is critical. Final check on the legal paperwork. It's for the acquisition." He turned slightly, the move meant to physically dismiss me, giving me the perfect opportunity. My heart hammered a steady rhythm, but my gaze was laser-focused. Lying open on his desk was the executive's summary. The bold, angular logo of Apex Pinnacle Group, APG, dominated the header. The text outlined the price, the terms, and the closing time, 9 a.m. Eastern, New Year's Day. The reality was profound. I, Scarlett Hayes, was buying out Randall Thorne. But beyond the acquisition summary, my eyes locked onto a separate printout, a memo from TDL's internal finance department. The subject line read, "Urgent. Internal audit flag, missing funds and vendor irregularities." The text clearly referenced a significant sum and the name Garrett Thorne. He knew. Or at least his internal team knew, and they were flagging the financial rot in his heir apparent just before the acquisition closed. This shifted my plan. The embezzlement wouldn't be a secret weapon. It would be part of the collateral damage Randall had to face. Randall finished his call, slamming the phone down with a sound of triumphant finality. "Finally done," he breathed, hastily collecting the papers. He looked at me, a flicker of genuine, proud excitement overriding his detachment. "Big things, Scarlett," he repeated, puffing out his chest. "The company is finally secure. You wouldn't understand the scale of this transaction, but it's a game changer. It ensures the Thorn name survives." "Of course, Dad," I said, stepping back, the image of the APG logo and the embezzlement memo etched in my mind. "I'll let you get back to your game-changing." I left the study. The evening drinks hour was already in full swing. Garrett was in the living room, holding court and sipping scotch. Willow was filming her arrival for her stream, a shimmering vision of high-fashion glamour. I maintained my quiet distance, observing the family dynamics with cold, professional eyes. I was no longer the hungry daughter seeking validation, but the silent judge witnessing the final, flawed performance before delivering the verdict. The clock was ticking toward the formal dinner, and I knew that by the time the crystal glasses were raised, the Thorn dynasty would have been purchased, and the truth would finally shatter their carefully constructed reality. The formal New Year's Eve dinner at the Thorn estate was a rigid ritual of performance, designed to reinforce Randall's status. The massive mahogany table gleamed, laden with crystal and fine china. I was seated at the far end, geographically isolated from the inner circle, a final, ironic gesture of my perceived irrelevance. Garrett, predictably, occupied the seat of honor at Randall's right hand. Willow, positioned perfectly for lighting, was at his left. Vivian presided at the opposite end, her gaze often fixed on her wine glass, preparing for the emotional blow she knew was coming. The food arrived in synchronized waves. Randall, usually boisterous, was jumpy, checking his watch with distracting frequency. Willow, of course, documented every second for her digital heiress holiday special stream, narrating the carving of the prime rib with breathless, artificial reverence. With the dessert plates cleared and the snifters of expensive brandy distributed, Randall stood, tapping his silver knife on his crystal glass, a sound that always commanded absolute silence. "Thank you all for joining us tonight. As we close out another successful chapter for the Thorn name," he began, ignoring the company's recent financial struggles, "I must share some momentous news. News that, effective tomorrow, will secure the Thorn legacy for the next century." He paused, scanning the room, milking the suspense, his gaze lingering on Garrett. "I have dedicated my entire professional life to building Thorn digital legacy. But all great institutions must evolve, and the time has come for a strategic change. Therefore, effective tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., he announced, his voice booming with forced triumph, "I have decided to sell the company." The chaos was instantaneous. Garrett, mid-sip of his brandy, violently sputtered, leaping to his feet. "Sell it. Dad, you promised. It was supposed to be mine. You can't be serious." Willow shrieked, her genuine, terrified entitlement overriding her desire for content. "Daddy, what about the legacy? You're destroying my brand." Randall raised a hand for silence. "I have been in negotiations for months with a very interested buyer. The deal is finalized, signed, and the wire transfer is scheduled for 9 a.m. sharp." "But the money!" Garrett shouted, his face scarlet. "That's our inheritance." Which brings me to the second and perhaps most important part of my announcement, Randall continued, his expression hardening into one of profound, self-righteous philanthropy. The proceeds from this sale will not be going to you children as inheritance. The room erupted. Garrett was shouting. Willow was openly weeping. Where is the money going? Willow wailed. Your mother and I will be using part of the proceeds for our retirement, Randall stated, projecting his voice over the noise. The remaining majority will be used to establish the Thorn Foundation, a charitable organization dedicated to supporting technology education for underprivileged youth. He was sacrificing their entitlement for his final, magnificent act of public piety. Through the storm, I sat absolutely still, a quiet, immovable object. I calmly picked up a truffle and ate it. My terrifying composure drew Vivian's attention. "Scarlett, darling," she murmured, her voice shaky. "You don't seem surprised." The table quieted, all eyes turning to me, the insignificant daughter, finally given center stage as an afterthought. I finished chewing, carefully placing my dessert fork down. I looked directly at Randall. "Before you continue, Dad, you sold the company to a buyer willing to pay a premium for a failing legacy system. Who is this company?" Randall's face broke into a final, triumphal smile. "It's a major Silicon Valley player, a brilliant, reclusive firm that saw the potential in our client list. The company is called Apex Pinnacle Group." I placed my hands flat on the polished mahogany. I paused for 3 full, agonizing seconds, allowing the name to settle in the stunned silence. Then I delivered the final, undeniable truth. "Dad," I said, my voice calm, clear, and utterly devoid of malice. "I am Apex Pinnacle Group." The air did not just fall silent. It seized up, thick and paralyzing. I watched Randall's face, the swift succession of emotions playing out like a psychological breakdown. Total confusion, then denial, followed by blinding, incandescent rage, and finally, the naked, raw fear of a man who realized he had been checkmated by the person he least suspected. Garrett was the first to move, the golden heir stripped of his dignity. He stumbled backward, his chair crashing loudly against the wall. "What the hell is this?" "Scarlett, stop it. This is a sick, elaborate joke." His voice was a panicked roar. Willow finally let her phone drop from her trembling hand, its microphone capturing her guttural sob. "Oh my God, it's real." I remained standing, utterly controlled. "Apex Hayes," I stated, defining the terms of my power, "is the professional name I've used for the last 10 years. Scarlett Hayes. I founded Apex Pinnacle Group, APG, after you dismissed my business proposal. APG is currently valued at $200 million. I just purchased your company." Randall stammered, gripping the table for support. "This is impossible. APG is a major entity, not by a child who ran away with $5,000. I slid the platinum business card for A. Hayes, CEO, across the table. It came to rest directly in front of his plate. "I built APG on the Pinnacle engine, the very middleware solution I pitched you 10 years ago, the one you called impractical. I built it, I refined it, and then I used that power to orchestrate this acquisition. APG controls your suppliers, Nexus Data, TechCore, and Hudson Logistics. We control your 2 largest clients. You had no leverage left, Dad. The $50 million was a generous payment for a company that was financially collapsing." Garrett rounded on me, his face twisted in fury. "You've been spying on us. You've been plotting against your own family. I've been working for my own future, Garrett. A future you never intended for me to have. I returned my gaze to Randall, my voice hardening. I offered you a way out, Dad. The Phoenix Gambit. 6 months ago. A partnership to revitalize the company and keep the Thorn name in power. You rejected it because you couldn't tolerate the thought of an anonymous entity challenging your authority. Now I own it all. Randall tried to rise fully, his chest heaving. This deal is off. I will fight this in court. I will not sell my company to my own daughter as some kind of revenge plot. I shook my head slowly, the certainty in my posture unwavering. Your lawyers have already vetted the deal, Dad. You signed the documents. The wire transfer is scheduled for tomorrow at 9 a.m. Your only recourse is to claim you were mentally incompetent when you signed the contract, which would tank the Thorn reputation overnight. That's not a legal defense. That's just pride. The room was heavy with the silence of the horrified guests. Randall slammed his hand on the table. You have made your choice, Scarlett. You cannot be my daughter and the person who took my company. You cannot be both. I am both, I whispered, the finality absolute. I always have been. You just refused to see the daughter who could also be the CEO. He stared at me for a long, terrible moment, the decades of prejudice and disappointment hanging between us. Then he turned and stormed from the room, the slam of his study door echoing through the estate. As the dining room emptied and the guests made their awkward, horrified excuses, Vivian slowly approached me. All those years, she whispered, tracing the platinum business card with a shaky finger. Why wait until now? I needed the anonymity, Mom. I needed you all to keep underestimating me. The moment you showed pride, Victor would have tried to control me. I had to secure my freedom first. I had to buy my seat at the table. She touched my shoulder, a gesture of unexpected, genuine connection. I should go check on him, she murmured, before looking back, her voice thick with regret. I am so sorry, Scarlett. I failed you. The simple confession pierced through my armor. I had come prepared for anger. I was disarmed by remorse. The corporate war was won, but the true battle, the fight for human reconciliation, was just beginning. I knew I needed to deal with Garrett's corruption next, a necessary step before any real healing could begin. The silence after Randall's dramatic exit was not peace. It was the eerie calm before a localized thunderstorm. I knew my next confrontation was the most volatile and, in some ways, the most personal. I had barely returned to my childhood bedroom, the temporary sanctuary, when the door burst open with a familiar, reckless violence. It was Garrett. The golden heir was no longer arrogant. He was a desperate, panicked man, his expensive tuxedo wrinkled, and his eyes bloodshot with rage and fear. The copious amounts of alcohol he had consumed only amplified his terror. "You calculated bitch!" he roared, slamming the door shut. He advanced on me, his fists clenched, his composure entirely gone. "This is not some game, Scarlett. This is our life. You planned this elaborate betrayal just to humiliate us." "Sit down, Garrett," I commanded, my voice low and utterly steady, cutting through his rage like a knife. "Your hysterics are irrelevant. The company is sold. The wire transfer happens in a few hours. Now we talk about your involvement." He laughed, a harsh, brittle sound of pure panic. "My involvement? I'm the victim here. I'm the one who dedicated a decade to the company, only to have my sister steal my inheritance." You dedicated a decade to using the company as your personal expense account. I corrected him, not raising my voice. And you almost destroyed it. I'm not here to talk about inheritance, Garrett. I'm here to talk about the $300,000. The color drained from his face instantly. The rage evaporated, replaced by a cold, immediate terror. He looked physically sick, his eyes darting frantically around the small room as if searching for an escape route. This was the moment of absolute, total exposure. The moment the golden boy realized his small, dirty secret was no longer protected by his father's blindness, and was now known by the new owner of the company. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his voice weak and trembling. "Don't insult my intelligence," I countered, walking over to him. "I've been auditing the books remotely for a year as part of my due diligence. I know about the phantom consulting fees routed through 3 separate shell accounts. Accounts you set up in the Caribbean under the name Phoenix Services, a pathetic, half-hearted attempt to hide your tracks. I know about the falsified vendor invoices for server maintenance that were actually ATM withdrawals in Vegas and Macau. I know about the massive gambling debts, Garrett, the sheer amount you needed to cover your losses. I had the IP logs showing the falsified entries were made from his office computer, after hours on the days when only his keycard accessed the building. It was a clean, traceable trail of embezzlement totaling $300,000, a significant felony. He collapsed into the desk chair, burying his face in his hands, his entire body shaking with shame. "It was only temporary," he mumbled into his palms. "I was going to pay it back after the next big deal. I swear, Scarlett, I just needed some time." "You needed to learn accountability, Garrett." I cut him off sharply. "And you failed. Miserably. You used the privilege Dad handed you as a shield for your own destructive habits. This isn't just about the money. It's about the deep-seated entitlement that almost destroyed the company Grandpa built." I stood directly in front of him, the CEO facing the rogue employee. "Now listen, because you have one chance to salvage your life, if not your pride. I am not pursuing criminal charges against you. That would require involving the federal authorities, which would destabilize TDL during the most critical phase of the Apex Pinnacle group transition, potentially costing hundreds of jobs. I will not pay that price for petty revenge." I paused, letting the magnitude of my mercy sink in. "Your options are non-negotiable. 1. You resign quietly, effective immediately, signing a non-disclosure agreement and a formal repayment plan for the $300,000, which I will deduct from your trust fund over the next 5 years. You must also enroll in an accredited MBA program by the fall, no exceptions. This is the only way to prove you're serious about change, to earn a future role in this new company, should you ever be qualified for one. 2. I hand the entire evidence package, transaction records, IP logs, and offshore account numbers to the FBI tomorrow morning, an hour after the acquisition press release hits the wire. You will face jail time, and the Thorne name will be forever associated with corporate fraud. You choose, Garrett. Forced redemption or prison." He lifted his head, his eyes red and bloodshot, completely defeated. He knew I held the absolute power. He finally nodded, a barely perceptible movement. I agree to the first option, the MBA." "Good," I said, my voice returning to a professional, final tone. "You will meet with my head of legal tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m. You will sign the documents, and you will not interfere with the transition in any way." He rose slowly, his posture utterly defeated. He didn't even look at me as he walked to the door. "You are an impossible person, Scarlett," he mumbled as he left. "I am an accountable person, Garrett," I corrected him. There's a difference. And accountability just saved your life. The house was steeped in the stillness of pre-dawn New Year's Day, the chaotic energy of the night replaced by a profound, sobering quiet. I was sitting at my old desk, reviewing the final internal memos before the 9 a.m. deadline, when a soft, hesitant knock came. It was Vivian. She entered, having shed her gala gown for a simple cashmere sweater and slacks. She looked tired, vulnerable, and her usual socialite composure was cracked. She didn't approach the desk. She went straight to the window seat, the same spot where she used to read me stories, and settled there, looking out at the darkened, snow-dusted grounds. "Your father has locked himself in his study," she said quietly, her voice low and weary. "He's convinced there must be some clause that will stop the sale. He's trying to call the former board members. He's desperate, Scarlett." "There isn't a clause, Mom," I said simply. "The deal is airtight. His lawyers confirmed it." She nodded, accepting the reality. She looked around the room, her gaze lingering on the dusty trophies and the Stanford banner, the frozen testament to the girl she knew. "I kept everything exactly as you left it," she began, her voice reflective. "I always thought you would come back once you got this rebellion out of your system. I thought you'd fail. We all did." "It was never a rebellion, Mom," I countered, the edge returning to my voice. "It was a career, a life, and I never missed the comfort. I missed the respect." $200 million, she mused, shaking her head slightly, the magnitude of the number finally registering. "My daughter built a company worth $200 million in secret, while we all thought you were barely scraping by. Why didn't you tell us?" "You could have asked, Mom. Any of you could have shown genuine interest, but none of you ever really wanted to know. It was easier to believe I was insignificant." Tears finally welled in her eyes, tears of profound regret. "I knew, Scarlett, not the details, not the scale of your success, but I knew you were brilliant. I saw it when you were little, how your mind worked differently, how you understood things the rest of us couldn't grasp." She wiped at her cheeks, her gaze meeting mine without evasion. "I was wrong," she confessed quietly, the simple phrase breaking through the decade of armor I had worn. "I told myself I was keeping the peace, being a supportive wife. But I failed as a mother when you needed an advocate. I chose my comfort, my position, over your truth. I sacrificed your worth to maintain the harmony." The simple, unvarnished confession was what I had truly been seeking. I had come prepared for anger. I was disarmed by remorse. "Garrett is an embezzler," I told her, the news leaving my mouth flat and neutral. $300,000. Gambling debts. I've given him an ultimatum. Forced redemption through an MBA or federal charges. Vivian closed her eyes, absorbing the shock of her golden boy's corruption. "Oh, Randall will be devastated. He was so blind to Garrett's flaws, so convinced he was the only heir." She opened her eyes, a new resolve hardening her expression. "But you offered him a way out. Not just revenge. You gave him a path to earn back his life. What happens now, Mom?" I asked, shifting the focus to her own future. "Tomorrow morning, the acquisition is public. Dad and Garrett will be offered figurehead advisory positions. They have lost their control." "And you," she pressed, "will you move back to New York?" I shook my head. "I will remain in San Francisco. My work is still in the valley." She nodded, understanding all I wasn't saying, that I had outgrown this house, this toxic dynamic, this version of myself. "Your father may never forgive you for this, Scarlett." I know, I acknowledged, looking out at the last shadows of the old year clinging to the landscape. But this isn't about forgiveness, Mom. It's about finally being seen. And it's about giving our family the opportunity to evolve, even if it has to be through force. Vivian rose, her posture straighter, her eyes clear. I want to help, she said softly. I want to help other girls like you, so their mothers don't make the same mistakes I did. She left, and the profound, cleansing silence that followed was entirely different. The reconciliation had begun, not with the CEO, but with the woman who had enabled him. It was an unexpected, powerful victory. I looked down at my watch. 8 a.m. New Year's Day was fast approaching, and with it, the final, inevitable, and most important confrontation with Randall. The new year dawned cold and clear over Green Acres, illuminating the Thorne estate in a stark, uncompromising light. The silence in the house was heavy, broken only by the quiet hum of the heating system. The time for reckoning had arrived. I came downstairs at 8:30 a.m., dressed in the crisp Armani power suit. Maria, the housekeeper, silently handed me a mug of strong coffee, her eyes communicating a mixture of awe and profound respect. I checked my phone. Commander Miller confirmed the press release was ready for global wire distribution at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. I was finishing my coffee when Randall appeared in the doorway of the kitchen. He looked devastatingly older than he had yesterday. The lines around his eyes were deeper, and his normally rigid posture was visibly stooped. He hadn't slept. His expensive suit jacket was wrinkled, and his tie was slightly askew, a profound violation of his characteristic perfection. The corporate titan was showing significant, visible cracks. "My study," he ordered, his tone devoid of its usual booming authority, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. I followed him down the hallway to the room that had always been the center of Thorne power. He took his seat behind the massive desk, the position he had used to intimidate rivals for decades. I chose not to sit in the visitor's chair. Instead, I walked to the edge of the desk, perching lightly on the mahogany, maintaining my professional equality. "My attorneys confirmed what you said last night," he began without preamble. His voice was flat, devoid of fight. "The sale is legally binding." The board vote was unanimous. "Of course it was," I replied, my voice cool and professional. "TDL has been losing market share for 3 years. Your technology is outdated, your management structure is bloated, and your development pipeline is empty." The board recognized a generous offer when they saw one. $50 million, he said, shaking his head. The company was valued at $70 million just 2 years ago. The company was overvalued 2 years ago, I corrected gently, and I offered more than any other potential buyer would have. Most would have stripped the assets and dissolved the Thorne name entirely. He looked up sharply, fear crossing his features. "And is that your plan? To erase your own family legacy?" "No," I confirmed. "Despite everything, I respect what Grandpa built and what you expanded. The Thorne name stays, though the company structure will change significantly. TDL will become the enterprise division of Apex Pinnacle Group, focusing on updating the legacy products and integrating them with the Pinnacle engine." "And me?" The question cost him dearly. "You will be offered a position as chairman emeritus," I stated. "No operational authority, but you will maintain an office, full benefits, and a generous compensation package. You can advise on client relationships and company history during the transition. You get to maintain your status without having to actually run a modern company." His jaw tightened. "A figurehead role." "A respected advisory position," I countered. It's the only path forward that preserves your reputation. He stood abruptly, walking to the window that overlooked the garden, his back to me. He stood there for a long moment, staring out at the property that generations of Thorn ambition had built. "How did you do it, Scarlett?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper, stripped of arrogance, demanding the truth. "How did you build something that valuable when you had nothing? No connections, no capital, no one taking you seriously." "I had my education," I reminded him gently, "the one thing you couldn't take from me, and I had tremendous motivation to prove you wrong." He turned back to face me, his eyes tired. "I expected you to fail, Scarlett. Everyone does. I thought I was protecting you from inevitable disappointment by ensuring you never got the chance to try." "That is not protection, Dad," I said, my voice softening slightly. "That is control. You thought you knew best, but you were wrong about me, and you were wrong about the direction of the industry. You were right about the middleware, weren't you? 10 years ago. The one with the cloud solution." I nodded. "Yes. I refined it, made it adaptable, used it to attract our first major clients. I built the empire using the blueprint you rejected." "Because of that," he mused, a flicker of professional respect finally crossing his face, "in some ways you had an advantage. Being underestimated is a powerful position if you know how to use it. No one saw you coming." "Clearly not," I said. Then came the final, painful truth. "Garrett has been embezzling from the company for at least 3 years," I informed him bluntly. $300,000. Gambling debts. I have all the documentation. He has chosen to resign quietly and enroll in an MBA program. Randall sank back into his chair, the shock of this new betrayal too much to process. "So both my son and my company were failing," he whispered, the admission a profound act of vulnerability, and I was too blind to see either. "Not blind," I said, placing my hand gently on the desk, just looking in the wrong direction. When he finally spoke again, his voice had changed completely. The arrogance was gone, replaced by genuine, reluctant admiration. "You outmaneuvered me completely, Scarlett," he said, meeting my gaze with a directness I'd never seen before. "Your grandfather would have been impressed." It was the closest to approval I had ever received. I took his hand, sealing the first professional agreement we had ever made as equals. "Welcome to Apex Pinnacle Group, Dad." I checked my watch one final time. It was 8:58 a.m. 2 minutes, I told him. "The press release goes out. Happy New Year, Dad. The work starts now." The corporate war was over, but the quiet, painstaking work of building a new family relationship, one based on truth, was just beginning. 6 months later, the Thorn estate in Green Acres felt utterly transformed, reflecting the quiet revolution that had taken place inside the corporate walls. The atmosphere of high-stakes tension and forced performance was gone, replaced by a purposeful, grounded energy. I stood in the newly renovated headquarters of Thorn Apex Digital, the former TDL building, which was now a dynamic hub of open workspaces and state-of-the-art technology. The company's financial success was undeniable. Client retention was secure, and new contract acquisitions had pushed revenue up significantly in the first quarter, far exceeding my most optimistic projections. My role as CEO of Apex Pinnacle Group, APG, meant I continued to split my time between San Francisco and this new East Coast division, overseeing the full integration of the Pinnacle engine platform. The transition hadn't been easy, but it had been ultimately successful, mainly because Randall had surprised everyone by embracing his new chairman emeritus role with unexpected grace. He found genuine satisfaction in mentoring the younger team members, leveraging his decades of relationships with long-standing clients. We had established a weekly private meeting, not for him to dictate, but for him to offer historical insights and industry context. For the first time, we were building a relationship based on mutual professional respect. He was finally seeing me, and I was finally seeing him, not as the Titan, but as a man who had made mistakes and was quietly working to redeem his legacy. Garrett's situation had been more complicated, but ultimately hopeful. He had signed the documents, repaid the embezzled funds from his frozen trust, and, to everyone's surprise, enrolled in an intensive MBA program at the University of Chicago. Forced to operate outside the comfort of his father's protection, he was finally facing the consequences of his entitlement and, slowly, starting to develop genuine skills. He called occasionally, not with corporate gossip, but with genuine, complex questions about finance and ethical leadership. He was forced to earn his knowledge. Willow had found her stride in the new environment. She became the highly effective brand ambassador for our growing consumer products division. Her followers were captivated by the family business saga, which she expertly curated as a story of female empowerment and reconciliation. Her digital heiress rebrand wasn't just superficial, it genuinely opened doors to younger markets. She was contributing measurable value, using her unique skills for a legitimate business purpose. But the most profound change was in Vivian. Freed from her role as the passive peacemaker, she had become an activist. She had become involved with a tech incubator for female founders in New Haven. "I want to help other girls like you, Scarlett," she had told me, her voice sincere, "so their mothers don't make the same mistakes I did." Her evolution was my quietest, most satisfying victory. As I walked through the new office space, the employees, a blend of old TDL veterans and new APG recruits, nodded respectfully. I was no longer the invisible daughter or the reclusive founder. I was simply Scarlett, the CEO who had modernized a failing family business and created new opportunities. My assistant interrupted my thoughts. "Your father is waiting in the conference room with the quarterly reports," she informed me, "and your mother called to confirm the intimate family dinner tonight." I headed toward the meeting, pausing briefly by the newly installed company timeline in the main lobby. My photo now hung alongside those of my grandfather and father, 3 generations of leadership, with my own achievements listed with the same prominence as theirs. New Year's Eve was approaching again. This year, the family would gather for a small, intimate dinner. No formal, performative gratitude ritual. No business posturing. Just a family still learning how to truly see and hear each other. The experience had taught me a critical truth. Success without reconciliation leaves both sides poorer. The true victory came not when I proved my father wrong, but when we both finally found a way to be right together. The Thorne legacy was secure, not because of the money, but because the family had finally learned to value the quality of the architect, not just her title. It was a new year, and for the Thorne family it was a profound new beginning.